it's Runi. Welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to be discussing tips for an engineering interview, to find your first internship, or to find your first job ever after graduation. I have been through many interviews and have learned things along the way, and I think it's time to share them because I have finally accepted an offer for a full-time role for a entry-level engineering position after I graduate. So yeah, just want to share some tips so you can get that bread, you know? So let's get this video started. So tip number one is that practice makes perfect. Your first interview is probably going to be your worst, because my first interview ever was with Chevron, and I went into that interview blindly and didn't know what kind of questions they were going to ask. I did not research anything about them because I was like, they're Chevron, like I know what they do. But they asked me a question like, do you want to work upstream or downstream in the oil manufacturing business? And I didn't know how to answer that question. But if I just asked people what kind of questions they asked, or just even looked on Glassdoor, like I would have been fine. But it was definitely a learning experience, and I just said yes to the interview because I wanted to practice and I knew they weren't gonna hire me anyway. So I was like, might as well, because they were like the only company my freshman year who would give me an interview, because like back then, what experience did I have? Absolutely none. So I would say get as many interviews as possible so you can practice your communication skills during an interview and just get comfortable with the entire process. And don't be afraid to make mistakes, because through every single interview along the way, you will gain the confidence during interviews. Tip number two is to always do research on the company. That is either asking students, your fellow classmates, if they ever had an interview, especially like if it's like a big company of Chevron, or just like the bigger companies where like a lot of people have interviews with them. Like, what type of questions did they ask you? Always check Glassdoor, because Glassdoor kind of outlines what type of questions these companies will ask you. And so always check that website, because they have so many insights into a company. After doing so many interviews, you will realize that a lot of these engineering companies will ask you similar questions. For instance, they might ask you, what is your ideal company culture? Tell me something about yourself. Like, what do you do outside of schoolwork? That one is a very popular one, and it seems very easy, right? But like in the moment, you just realize that you expected them to just ask you engineering questions, but that's not always the case, because they want to know like who you are outside of being a student. Like if you're into like photography, or if you do like club volleyball, like they're interested in who you are as a person and not only who you are as an engineer. Tip number three is to be prepared for behavioral questions. So usually when it comes to behavioral questions, you want to use the STAR method. The STAR method stands for situation, task, action, and result. So when will you use this method? For instance, if they ask you, tell me about a time where you had to work in a group, and how did the end result of this group work? So S, situation, you want to describe the situation. Was it with a design group, or was it in your resident assistant job where you had to plan a program, or just any instance you're working with other people? You want to describe the situation so they understand the background of your reply. And then task is where you describe what you had to do, what was the purpose of this situation, like what you had to do basically. Either do a program or describe the project you had to complete. A, as in action, stands what was your responsibility? Were you delegating tasks? Were you the leader? Were you the one responsible for the calculations? Like, what was your contribution in this group? Or as a result, the result is like, how did it go? How did the group project go? How did the program end up doing? Did you get A on the report? Did you end up turning in the project on time? Just the end result of this situation. I would definitely say in the early years of your college education, like your freshman and sophomore year, you might not have as much experience when it comes to these behavioral questions. So be prepared to like BS it, you know, just come up with the example, kind of alter something that happened in the past, just like BS it, because you know, fake it till you make it. We've all done it. I probably lied in an interview my freshman and sophomore year because I just didn't have that experience yet. So don't be afraid. We're all just trying to make it. I think we've all faked it till we made it. So yeah. Tip number 4 is to be prepared for the environment of the interview. Some popular interview styles may be, it might be a Zoom call, it might be a on-site interview, or a interview over lunch or dinner. And it can also be a group style interview. I would definitely say a Zoom call is probably one of the least stressful types of interviews because you're kind of like in your own space. But I would say if it's during a Zoom call, be prepared to have your laptop charged, that you have the link to get into the Zoom call, that you have a good connection. Make sure the like background of the interview is like professional setting. One recruiter once told me that she had a Zoom call with someone who had like empty and like alcohol all in the background of the video frame. So just like look at it, make sure that it looks fine. Yeah, have your background looking nice, something like this, somewhere that you feel comfortable having a conversation with a recruiter through your computer. And then I would definitely say a more stressful environment would be an on-site interview, because you might be traveling, going out of state, driving there, taking a flight. Those are much more stressful, but on-site interviews definitely give you more of a perspective of how the company is. You get to see the type of people that actually work there, and also what location it's at. But an on-site interview would definitely require more preparation. Also, on-site interviews tend to be kind of longer, so it may require like 3 or 5 hours of your time, and it's hella draining. So just be like prepared to like spend a long day asking more questions and just being in more settings where you're talking to multiple people who are sometimes asking you the same questions over and over again. And then a lunch or a dinner interview, they tend to be more relaxed because you're like kind of dining. It's more of a chance for you to like kind of ask some questions over a meal, go back and forth with jokes and stories. It's more of a setting where they get to know you as a person. It can be like an instance where you kind of overthink stuff, like, oh, what kind of drink should I order? What meal should I get? Should I order alcohol? You know, like, it can be stressful in that sense. My first ever like dinner type of like meet and greet was like this past semester. I kind of like talked about it over my how to do a career fair video, which is like kind of long, but basically it wasn't like an interview, but it was just like a meet and greet. But basically I was at dinner, all of them were males. Yeah, but we didn't really talk about, we talked about like school and stuff, but we didn't talk about like actually working there. It was just a chance for us to meet the recruiters and get to know our faces so they can recognize us at the career fair. But it was like, I was like overthinking stuff because like I was the only one who ordered like sweet tea and all the guys ordered water. I was like stressing out what I should order, like just things like that. To be honest, they really don't care. Like they might like kind of like judge you a little bit if you like order alcohol and like no one else did. So like always look towards the recruiters and what they order, you know, like the vibe of it. So yeah, like definitely over a meal, you just tend to overthink, but you don't have to. Like I'm telling you right now, you don't have to overthink it. Just like calm down and just like enjoy your free meal. Basically you get a free meal, which is always a plus. And then there is group interviews. Group interviews are stressful in the sense that you see your competition, the people that you're interviewing against, but it's also a chance for you to connect with other college students who are interviewing for this company, get to know them, link up with them through LinkedIn. It's also a chance just to be like exposed to that type of interview style, because it's like, again, it's almost a full workday of like just interviews with different parts of the company and different groups. And yeah, I remember my first group interview. I had to go to Houston. They like flew me out. It was like my first experience ever where like a company did that. They paid for a hotel. But I would definitely say I was so nervous that I just lacked the confidence through those interviews. I didn't get that internship. This was like, yeah, this was my like sophomore year interviewing for an internship, and I didn't get the internship, and I didn't feel confident in the interview either. But it was tip 5 is what to wear to a interview. Definitely always dress business professional unless stated otherwise. So if they just don't say anything, just assume that you're gonna come in looking good, wearing your suits and your blazer and your tie. Just expect that. If it's a business casual event, then dress business casual. If you're confused between the difference, the way I kind of describe it is business casual is no blazer, and then business professional is blazer. And that goes for both males and females. And I know being a college student, you don't really have the money to buy like brand new business clothes. So I definitely recommend going thrifting. All of my business outfits are mostly thrifted. It's a very good way to like save money and actually like find like pretty good pieces. All my blazers are basically secondhand. Also, don't be afraid to ask someone if you can borrow their blazer. I have instances where the younger engineer girls needed outfits for a event or for an interview, and I'm always willing to share clothing pieces, you know, sharing that wealth of what you have. So yeah, that's an alternative if you can't afford business clothes, because I definitely couldn't. And yeah, definitely recommend that. Tip number 6 is to always have questions to ask after an interview. Have about like 5 to 7 questions. If it's a longer day, like on-site interview or like a lunch type interview, have even more questions. Basically, these questions allow you the time to interview the company that you are interviewing with. It gives you a chance to see how they are, because at the end of the day, they're not the only ones interviewing you. You are also interviewing them to see if their company fits with the company type or culture that you are looking for. So don't be afraid to ask those questions about diversity and equity if you come from a ethnically different background, or asking them questions about like how many females are in this group, or what is the female to male ratio within this company. And sometimes these recruiters will like curve around that answer, and if you notice that, then you have to realize that it's like not one of their top priorities. And then there will be an instance where you kind of just blank out with the questions you have to ask, because you may have written down your portfolio or your folder, but you don't want to open it up during a interview. You can always ask them like, hey, can I open up my portfolio? To ask you some specific questions that I've written down. Sometimes you might feel awkward to ask that question. So think back to some questions they asked you during the interview and ask them. Because for instance, they might ask you, how did you find this company to apply for? Or how did you get here? You know, you can ask them the same question. Be like, how did you find this company? How long have you been here? And just kind of exaggerating on that topic. And just remember that you're interviewing this company too, and you have the privilege to ask them some hard questions of how their company functions and how they work. So that is the end of this video. Hopefully I gave you some insightful tips when it comes to going into that interview, and I know that you're gonna get that internship or that job, and you just need to believe in yourself and you'll get there eventually, you know? But yeah, this is Runi, and hopefully you enjoy this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Catch you later. Bye.